My brother-in-law, David, believed the law was a weapon he could wield, that a dusty, long-forgotten document gave him the right to seize my home and my life. What he failed to understand was that he wasn't the predator in this story. He was just the final, desperate pawn in a masterful game my husband had designed for him from his very deathbed. Before we dive into the secret I've carried for all these years, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below guessing what the final twist will be. Now, where were we? The first thing that truly broke me after Mark was gone wasn't the tidal wave of grief I had been warned about by well-meaning friends and pamphlets from the funeral home. It was the silence. It wasn't a simple absence of his voice or the familiar sound of his heavy footsteps on the hardwood floors. It was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket of pure nothing that descended upon our home, smothering every potential sound and amplifying the echoes of every memory. Every corner of the house we had poured our souls into, meticulously designing and building together over 20 years, wasn't just filled with our memories. It was our memories, solidified into wood, stone, and glass. I would find myself standing motionless for what felt like hours in the center of the living room, just staring at the built-in bookshelves he'd spent an entire month perfecting. I remembered him so vividly, his dark hair and favorite worn-out jeans covered in a fine, pale layer of sawdust, the sweet, sharp scent of fresh pine clinging to him like a second skin. It was a scent I now longed for with an ache that was almost physical. He'd had a carpenter's pencil, worn smooth with use, tucked behind his ear, his brow furrowed in that specific way it did when he was deeply focused, his tongue sticking out just slightly from the corner of his mouth like a little kid. He was a perfectionist in all things. He sanded each individual board until it was as smooth and cool as a river stone, his calloused, capable hands, now just a memory, working tirelessly. He did it all because he knew how much I loved the feel of a well-made book and the sight of a sturdy, overflowing shelf to hold our collection of stories. Late one night, when he thought I was asleep, he'd taken his old pocketknife and carved a tiny, almost hidden M+S inside a heart on the bottom shelf, a secret signature of our partnership, a permanent little testament to us. My fingers would trace its deep outline now, feeling the cold, unresponsive grain of the wood where the warmth and pressure of his hand used to be. This house wasn't just a structure of coordinated materials, it was the physical, breathing manifestation of our shared history. I remember the sweltering summer day we poured the concrete for the back patio, the air thick and heavy with the earthy smell of wet cement and freshly cut grass. We were so exhausted, drenched in sweat, but giddy with the thrill of creating something permanent together. Like a couple of kids, we raced to press our handprints into a wet corner before it could set, a lasting, childish mark of our union. I could still close my eyes and feel the ghost of his large, strong hand covering mine, his strength guiding me as we pressed down together into the yielding gray slush. It was while I was drowning in that bottomless, black ocean of grief, utterly paralyzed by the sheer, crushing totality of my loss, that his own brother, David, saw not a sister-in-law to comfort, but an opportunity to exploit. He didn't just kick me while I was down. He arrived with a metaphorical bulldozer, intending to level the sacred space that held the last tangible pieces of my life with Mark. He was banking on some obscure legal loophole he'd unearthed, convinced my grief-addled mind couldn't possibly comprehend its implications or summon the will to fight. He looked at me, a grieving widow who could barely bring herself to make a cup of coffee, and saw someone weak, broken, and easy to manipulate into homelessness. But he gravely, fatally underestimated me. And more importantly, he underestimated the brother he had envied his entire life. He was about to receive a masterclass in both law and loss, a lesson he would carry for the rest of his days. When the doctors at the clinic, with their professionally somber faces and carefully chosen words, told us the cancer was terminal, that the treatments were no longer holding the line, our world didn't just shrink, it imploded. It collapsed into a black hole of what-ifs and not enough times. The drive home from that final, devastating appointment was the quietest of our entire 20-year marriage. The world outside the car windows continued on, oblivious, people laughing on sidewalks, cars honking, the sun shining as if it had no right to. We just held hands across the center console, the hard plastic of the gearshift digging painfully into my fingers, the silence in the car screaming louder and more terrifyingly than any words ever could. But Mark, my brilliant planner, my unwavering rock, refused to let us drown in that despair. After one single day of allowing ourselves to completely fall apart, a day spent wrapped in each other's arms, crying until our bodies were hollowed out and utterly exhausted, he woke up with a look of grim determination I knew so well. He decided, with a clarity that felt both heroic and heartbreaking, to spend his last few months not succumbing to the disease, but ensuring I would be okay. He became a general, meticulously preparing his defenses for a war he wouldn't live to see fought. We sat for hours upon hours at our large oak dining table, the same table where we'd hosted countless Thanksgiving dinners filled with laughter and family, now surrounded by ominous stacks of paper that held the architecture of our life. His body was weakening day by day, a fact that was a constant, dull ache in my chest, but his mind remained as sharp and brilliant as ever. He insisted on going over everything. Our finances, our wills, our insurance policies, every single piece of paper that defined our shared existence. His only concern, his singular focus, was me. He was obsessed with making sure I could live out the rest of my days in the home we loved, without a single financial worry to add to my grief. He saw a storm gathering on the horizon that I, blinded by my tears and my desperate denial, couldn't even imagine. One evening, his voice had become a weak, raspy whisper, but his will was as firm as steel. He pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope, its weight feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. "Don't open this unless you absolutely have to," he'd said, his eyes, though tired, locking onto mine with an intensity that scared me to my core. "This is for if David makes a move. Not if Sarah. When? Promise me you'll be strong. Promise me you will follow the plan and hear exactly, no matter what happens, no matter who tries to tell you otherwise." I promised, my voice choked with unshed tears, my heart breaking, never guessing how soon, or how cruelly, that sacred promise would be tested. After he was gone, a thick, disorienting fog of grief settled over everything in my world. Days became a painful, monotonous blur of waking up to the fresh, gut punch of remembering he wasn't there, followed by the exhausting, monumental effort of just getting through the hours until I could sleep again. His brother, David, was at the funeral, of course. He performed the part of a grieving sibling for the assembled crowd. He gave me a stiff, awkward hug that felt like being embraced by a cold, unfeeling statue, and mumbled something generic about being there for me if I needed anything. The words felt hollow, rehearsed, like a line from a bad movie he'd seen. Mark had always been the protector in our family, the one who gently but firmly shielded us, and others, from David's more opportunistic side. Mark loved his brother, I knew he did, but he wasn't blind to his fundamental character. I remember one Christmas years ago, the house filled with the smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon. David pulled our elderly Aunt Carol aside, his voice a conspiratorial whisper, trying to convince her to invest $10,000 in a get-rich-quick scheme involving imported, miracle, vitamins from an unknown, untraceable source. It was an obvious, predatory scam, aimed at a sweet woman he knew was too trusting. Mark had to step in. He quietly retrieved the check from her, his face a mask of disappointment, and had a long, tense talk with David in the other room. The voices were muffled, but the angry, pained cadence of Mark's tone was unmistakable. He came back looking emotionally exhausted and said something I'd never forget. "David knows the price of everything, Sarah, but the value of nothing." Over the years, I saw that sentiment proven time and again, the way David's eyes would linger on Mark's new car with a sour glint of envy, the constant, passive-aggressive comments about the cost of our modest vacations, the subtle, pervasive jealousy that poisoned every family gathering. He saw Mark's happiness not as something to celebrate, but as something he was being denied. I just never imagined that one day I'd be the one he would try to make pay the price for his own bitter inadequacies. A week after the funeral, David called. His voice, now completely stripped of its thin, poorly worn veneer of sympathy, was all business. "We need to talk about the house, Sarah," he said, his tone so casual and detached it was chilling. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at Mark's empty coffee mug still on the counter from his last morning, and his voice felt like a violent intrusion into my sanctuary of sorrow. "What is there to talk about, David?" I asked, the fog in my brain struggling to part enough to form a coherent thought. "Mark and I had an ironclad will. Everything is sorted." And that's when he dropped the bomb, his words meticulously chosen for maximum psychological impact. "There's a little legal issue with the deed," he started, a smug, triumphant tone creeping into his voice that made my skin crawl. "See, years ago, when you and Mark needed that loan for the down payment, I was generous enough to co-sign. To protect my investment, my name was put on the title as a joint tenant. Just a formality at the time, of course." He paused, relishing the dramatic effect, letting the silence hang between us like a guillotine. "But legally, Sarah, under the right of survivorship, with Mark gone, the house automatically becomes mine. His share reverts to me. It's just the law." I felt the blood drain from my face. The room started to spin, the edges of my vision blurring into a dark tunnel. Joint tenant? Right of survivorship? I'd heard the terms before in passing, but the implication, the sheer predatory cruelty of it, hit me like a physical blow. He was trying to make me homeless. He was twisting a supposed favor from 2 decades ago into a weapon to erase my entire life with Mark. "No," I stammered, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned bone white. "No, David, that can't be right. We have a will. Mark left everything to me. We paid you back years ago." He actually chuckled, a dry, grating sound, like stones grinding together. "Oh, Sarah, a will can't override a property deed. That's the beauty of the loophole. It's a real shame, it really is. But facts are facts. Paying back the loan doesn't matter. What matters is the name on the title. You'll have to find somewhere else to live. I'll give you 30 days. I'm being generous. Generous." The absolute, unmitigated nerve of that single word lit a match in the cold, desolate landscape of my grief. The sorrow that had me paralyzed for weeks began to crystallize into pure, cold rage. He wasn't just trying to take a house. He was trying to tear down a memorial. He was trying to steal the very last, tangible piece of Mark I had left. The promise I made to Mark echoed in my ears. "Be strong." The harassment started almost immediately, a calculated campaign of psychological warfare designed to break my will. He'd text me pictures of tiny, dilapidated apartment listings with comments like, "This one's more in your price range now, I think. Gotta be realistic." Winking face, he called at all hours, his voice laced with false, saccharine concern, asking if I'd started packing yet, if I needed boxes. One afternoon, I came home from a grief support group meeting, my emotions already scraped raw, and found him on my front lawn with a contractor. He was loudly discussing plans for an extension on our bedroom, pointing and gesturing with a broad, proprietary air. He just smiled and waved at me as I pulled into the driveway, acting like he already owned the place. He saw my tears as weakness and my shocked silence as surrender. He had no idea I was documenting every single thing. Every call, every text, every unsolicited visit. It all went into a meticulous log. My shock had burned away, leaving behind a steely, unshakable resolve. Mark had told me to be strong. This is what he meant. I wasn't just going to fight this. I was going to dismantle David's greedy little plan, piece by piece. I spent a full day, fueled by black coffee and righteous anger, researching property law firms. I wasn't looking for a negotiator or a mediator. I was looking for a killer. I found one in a woman named Ms. Albright, who had a reputation for being an absolute shark in the courtroom. Sitting in Ms. Albright's sleek, intimidating glass-walled office, I laid out the whole ugly story, my voice growing stronger and steadier with every sordid detail I recounted. I showed her the log of David's harassment, the screenshots of his cruel texts, the threatening, official-looking eviction notices he'd printed from the internet and left in my mailbox. She listened intently, her face an unreadable mask of professional calm, her fingers steepled under her chin as if in prayer. When I was finally done, my throat hoarse, I opened the heavy manila envelope from Mark with trembling hands, the one I had opened the night David first called. I handed the files to her. She picked up the copy of the 20-year-old deed David had so helpfully sent me as proof of his claim and set it aside, then began to review the documents from Mark's envelope. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Your brother-in-law," she said, her voice calm and sharp as a shard of glass, is what we in the legal world call dangerously misinformed. She then explained the crucial difference between a joint tenancy and a tenancy in common. Joint tenancy does indeed have a right of survivorship, but tenancy in common does not. With that arrangement, each person owns a distinct, separate share that they can pass on through their will. The key, she said, tapping a polished fingernail on a clause in the paperwork from Mark's envelope, is right here. When you and Mark refinanced the house 5 years after buying it, you paid David back in full. As part of that refinancing, the title was subsequently refiled with the county clerk. You and Mark were registered as tenants in common. David's original claim as a joint tenant was legally nullified 15 years ago. His name isn't on the current, legally binding deed at all. Relief hit me, so hard I felt dizzy, lightheaded, the tension draining from my body in a rush. But Miss Albright held up a hand. But Sarah, even if he had a legal leg to stand on, which he absolutely does not, she continued, her eyes glittering with predatory fire, you are the surviving spouse. In this state, the law has incredibly strong protections for widows. A court isn't going to kick a grieving woman to the curb for a greedy in-law, especially one who behaves like this. His case is baseless, and his behavior is flat-out harassment. It was then that I took a deep breath and revealed the rest of the plan the secret Mark had detailed in a handwritten letter tucked inside that envelope. I explained that Mark knew this would happen. He knew David's character so intimately that he predicted this exact play. The original co-signing, the initial joint tenancy, it was all bait. The refinancing wasn't just a smart financial move, it was the hidden mechanism of the trap. Mark had made absolutely sure David never saw the new paperwork, letting him live for 15 long years with the deluded belief that he held a winning lottery ticket. In his letter, Mark wrote that he had considered telling David the truth to put a stop to his envy, but then decided against it. He wrote, "Greed is a weed, Sarah. If you don't pull it out by the root, it just grows back stronger. He needs to learn a lesson he can feel, one that costs him something." Miss Albright leaned back in her expensive leather chair, her professional calm melting away into sheer, stunned admiration. "My God," she whispered, shaking her head slightly. "Your husband wasn't just a planner. He was a grandmaster playing chess from 3 moves ahead, from beyond the grave. So," she leaned forward, a conspiratorial glint in her eye, "this isn't a defense. This is a performance. And the question isn't how we defend against him. The question is, how big of a lesson do you want to teach him?" I looked at the picture of Mark on my phone, his smiling, confident eyes looking back at me, and I told her, I want it to be a lesson he will never, ever forget. We scheduled one last meeting at Miss Albright's office. I had her assistant invite David, framing it as a meeting to discuss the terms of my surrender and the orderly transition of the property. He showed up 5 minutes early, practically vibrating with smug anticipation. He was wearing a cheap, shiny suit that was too tight in the shoulders and carrying a worn leather briefcase, playing the part of a captain of industry about to close a major deal. He sat across the enormous mahogany table from us, a smirk plastered on his face, pointedly refusing to make eye contact with me. "So," he started, addressing my lawyer directly, his voice dripping with condescension. Glad Sarah finally came to her senses and saw the writing on the wall. "Like I said, I'm a generous man. I'll give her 60 days instead of 30 to vacate. That's my final offer. Take it or leave it." Miss Albright didn't say a word. She simply, and with great ceremony, slid a single piece of paper across the polished table toward him. "That," she said, her voice as cold as ice, "is the current, valid deed to the property, filed with the county clerk 15 years ago. The one listing Mark and Sarah as tenants in common. As you can see, your name does not appear on it. It seems your legal loophole is based on an old, expired document and a complete, fundamental misunderstanding of property law." David's smirk vanished, as if it had been slapped off his face. He snatched the paper, his eyes darting frantically across the text, his brain struggling to process the words. His face went from a ruddy, confident red to a sickly, pale white. He began to sputter. But the original agreement, the right of survivorship, I co-signed, was nullified the second you were bought out and the title was refiled. Miss Albright cut in, her voice sharp and unforgiving. Mark's 50% share passed directly to Sarah through his will as a standard with a tenancy in common. She now owns 100% of the home. You have zero claim, zero equity, zero rights. You have nothing. The room was dead silent, the only sound David's ragged, shallow breathing. He just stared at the paper, his cheap confidence utterly shattered. And that's when I finally spoke, my voice quiet and steady, yet it carried across the table like a hammer blow. This was never about the law, was it, David? This was about you seeing a chance to kick me when I was at my lowest. You saw my grief and you thought it was weakness. I leaned forward, forcing him to meet my eyes. But the thing you really misunderstood wasn't the law. It was your brother. Mark knew who you were. He told me he loved you, but that he pitied you. He felt sorry for you because you could never find happiness in your own life, so you were always trying to grab pieces of other people's. I let that hang in the air, a final judgment. He knew you would do this, David. He planned for it. That first deed, that was bait. He set a trap for your greed 15 years ago, and you just walked right into it, drooling all the way. This was his final lesson to you. His face was a pathetic, crumbling mess of rage, shame, and defeated confusion. But Miss Albright still wasn't finished. And on top of that, she said, placing a thick folder on the table with a heavy, definitive thud that made him jump. We have documented every text, every call, every threat, every visit. We have a file ready for a restraining order for stalking and harassment. Furthermore, we are sending you this invoice for my legal fees, which you will be paying in full. And if you ever contact, approach, or even mention my client's name again, we will not hesitate to file a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress and attempted inheritance theft that will bankrupt you for the rest of your miserable life. Are we clear? David just deflated. The arrogant man who had swaggered and now looked small, pathetic, and utterly broken. He shoved the deed back across the table as if it were on fire, his hand trembling violently. He stood up without another word, turned, and walked out of that room completely and utterly defeated. I never heard from David again. Not a call, not a text, not another word. The silence in my house eventually returned, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer the crushing, empty silence of overwhelming grief. It was the peaceful, solid silence of a sanctuary, a home I had fought for and won. Standing in the living room, I no longer felt like I was drowning. I felt anchored. I didn't just protect my home. I executed my husband's final wish, protecting his memory and our life's work from his own brother's bottomless greed. In the end, David taught me something profound. By trying to break me, he forced me to find a fire inside myself I thought had been extinguished forever. I learned that grief and strength aren't opposites. Sometimes, grief is the fuel for a strength you never knew you possessed. The lesson in loss wasn't just for him. It was for me, too. I lost the love of my life, but in the fight to protect what we built, in carrying out his final, brilliant, and ruthless plan, I found a version of myself I never knew existed, a woman my husband knew was there all along. If this story left you speechless, smash that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, was justice served, or did I go too far? And don't forget to subscribe, you won't want to miss next week's chilling confession.